and welcome to this week's episode of Hocus Focus, episode number 3. And I'm Sara Mondaini.
And I'm Thomas Sheridan, at your service.
And wow, the responses to last week's BBC special were unbelievable. And it's great that the one topic in-depth formats are such a hit with you. And so we'll definitely be producing some more of those types of special broadcast editions in the future. And it's been a busy week. I had the pleasure of chatting with Gary Michael Vasey, and I had a really interesting discussion about dowsing and earth energies. So that will be uploaded by the time this episode goes to air. And Gary's also one of our regular contributors to the location reports. So if you haven't seen that chat yet, then please do give it a watch after the show. And tonight, as always, we've got some more Fortean topics to discuss, as well as our regular reviews and psychic segments. And we hope that you'll give us your insights too in the comments and the live chat once again, because that just gives the show an extra dimension. So thank you for doing that. And how was your week this week, Thomas?
Same yourself, fairly busy. I'm doing a podcast soon that should be out by the time the next one comes out, with our friends Fiona and Tina on their pagan podcast.
Oh, so lovely.
That will be out soon, and I'm getting ready now for the Mysterious Hair Conference in September and that kind of thing, and working on our book, which is inching to the finish line, but it has to be done right. And that's basically it.
Yeah, we're coming up to the Mysterious Earth in September and October. It'll be Halloween before you know it.
I can't believe how fast this year is flying. I really can't.
Gone very quickly. Well, tonight's first topic is the topic of spiritualism. Now, spiritualism is a belief system and a philosophical movement that believes there's a spiritual dimension that exists alongside the physical world, that there's life after death, and that the spirits of the deceased individuals can communicate with the living through mediums or other means. Now, I'm not a spiritualist, but I do believe there is a spiritual realm and that we do continue to exist after death, as well as having the ability to communicate with that world. So firstly, I'm going to talk about what spiritualism is in the context of it being a social religious movement, and then talk a little bit about its history and key players. But after that, I want to talk about it in respect to what I think about it from my own personal point of view, rather than just a social movement. So spiritualism can be traced back to the 1600s with a man called Emanuel Swedenborg. It wasn't known as spiritualism then, but there was the same belief. And Swedenborg was a scientist and an inventor, and he was also considered a very educated man. When he was 55 years old, he started experiencing visions that would show him the existence of the afterlife. And he claimed that he went on journeys and had conversations with not only figures from the Bible, but also beings from the moon and Venus and Mars. Now, some might think that's a bit far out, but during one of his clairvoyant journeys, he correctly reported on a fire that had ravaged Stockholm, which was over 300 miles away from where he was sitting. And as time went on, he started to believe that God had chosen him to reform Christianity and to start a new church. And it's here that I start to become a bit wary of Swedenborg. And I'm not saying that he didn't have clairvoyant ability, but I'm starting to think he might have put too much faith in the voices or the pictures that he was seeing, and therefore became a little bit self-deluding. But having said that, he became the prelude to the spiritualist movement, which is said to have actually started on the 31st of March, 1848, with the Fox sisters, Margaret and Kate, who are said to have been the incentive of the modern spiritualist movement. Now, in 1848, the sisters claimed to have communicated with a spirit through mysterious knocks and rappings in their home in the small town of Hydesville in New York. And they asked the presence in the house to mimic their claps and knockings, and they asked it to tap out the ages of the children in the house. And they asked it to give 2 knocks if it was human, But on this question, they got no response. So they asked it to knock twice if it was spirit. And it was then that they got the 2 knocks in response. And after this, the sisters became famous and they were asked to give a public demonstration, and the newspapers reported on the seances. And it was this that marked the beginning of a series of seances and mediumistic demonstrations by the Fox sisters. And it drew the attention of many, many curious people, and it became a philosophical and religious movement within Western society. Now, after this became public, spiritualism exploded and became a full-blown movement. Mediumship became a popular phenomenon, and people from different social backgrounds wanted to connect with the deceased through mediums. Now, the thing with the Fox sisters is that they eventually said that the initial correspondence with the spirit presence, who they claimed was a man who had been murdered in the house that they lived in many years before, was actually a hoax. But then, strangely, later on, they recanted that again, and 50 years later, a skeleton of a man was dug up at the house by investigators. Then in the mid-1800s, spiritualism went beyond the United States and the Fox sisters, and it reached Europe and other parts of the world. And the movement attracted a diverse range of followers, including intellectuals, artists, and even some prominent figures like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was the creator of Sherlock Holmes. And spiritualist circles were formed where practitioners gathered to conduct seances and trance sessions and automatic writing to receive messages from the spirit world. And these gatherings often featured mediums who claimed to have the ability to channel spirits and relay their messages to the living. And the movement faced both criticism and scrutiny, and skeptics accused mediums of fraud and deception, putting their abilities to various psychological and physiological factors. And despite the skepticism, spiritualism continued to grow. And by the late 19th century, it had become a significant cultural and religious force. Now, at the end of the century, investigators started to consider that the phenomena may be to do with mental powers and the superhuman powers of the human mind. And so the Society for the Psychical Research was set up in London in 1882. And more of these societies popped up around the world. And the researchers then began to look at whether mediums got their information from ESP rather than from spirits. Although researchers haven't been able to understand how mediums can know certain things in their trance states that they've never been privy to in their waking states. And researchers narrowed it down to 3 things: fraud, spirit, or thought transference. Now, while there are lots of fraudulent mediums out there, there are also many excellent mediums that science hasn't been able to ascertain how or what is going on. So that is a brief history of spiritualism. And later on in the discussion, I'd like to talk about my own experiences with it and what I think of the research and why I think it fails so many times. But for now, I'll let Thomas speak and give us his thoughts on it.
Yes, it's very difficult for people today to understand just how massive spiritualism was in the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. It was as big as, say, UFO, ancient aliens, that kind of thing is today. It was the sort of like the Fortean paranormal du jour of the period. Following the Fox sisters' experiences in Hydeville in upstate New York, it just exploded, where you had Abraham Lincoln and his wife doing seances and spiritual events inside the White House. But this shows how influential the spiritualism was. The Third Reich was probably a result of a spiritualist meeting. Following the Tula Society's creation and the Free Corps smashing of the Bavarian Soviet in 1919, 2 aristocrats who had been executed by the Bolsheviks had been brought forward in a seance inside the Intercontinental Hotel in Munich and had said that their disembodied heads were seen floating around the table where the seance, the spiritualism seance, was performed. And they said that very shortly, the Freya Christus, the Germanic Christ who would liberate the German people, will appear in this building. And a couple of days later, Adolf Hitler walked in the front door, and immediately they stared into his steel blue eyes, and they knew right away that's who they were talking about. So that's how powerful spiritualism has been in the development of history and culture. But in terms of the development of technology, it's played an enormous part that people are not necessarily aware of. The early days of radio and the development of radio technology was driven almost entirely by spiritualism. There was a belief that they could create technologies that could contact what they call spirits, and things like so many of the developments within radio, such as the vacuum tube valve and other elements, were designed, the use of crystals, in order to try and contact spirits. And people like Thomas Edison were very heavily involved in this. Even a kind of a hard-nosed atheist, similar like such as Tesla, said that he was bringing true voices that he could not explain from the ether. And there was one particular individual by the name of Crookes. I think his first name is William. And Crookes had developed a thing called the Crookes tube, which allowed him to transmit pictures by means of radio. And it was the very first television transmission. So the television transmission was a result of an interest in spiritualism. And Crookes tube used the Maltese cross projected through the tube as the first image sent, and in order to blank out the electrons that were flowing towards the screen and transmitted to a television. So the Crookes tube, and it was designed to see spirits. Now, there was a huge technological necessity to do this. There was also spirit photography came big out of this as well. And lots of them were fakes, double exposures, using the same plate. And then there was also the ectoplasm thing, which was shown to be, in many cases, cloth that was coming out of people's mouths. And this brought about individuals who set about to debunk or expose spiritualism as frauds. The most famous of all these was Harry Houdini. Now, Harry Houdini never said that he didn't believe that this stuff was possible. He was only interested in pursuing frauds, because he was a mama's boy, and when his mother died, he was desperate to contact her. Now, Houdini exposed lots of frauds, but also probably damaged the reputation of sincere spiritualists, and this caused a falling out between him and Arthur Conan Doyle. The two of them were once the best of friends. When he died, Houdini said he would do everything to try and contact his wife from beyond the grave. And he died, we know, accidentally in a stunt that went wrong, where I think he suffered an appendix burst while he was under the water and couldn't get out in time and drowned. There used to be a spiritualist program on American radio where the wife would go every year to try and contact Harry to come through, and he never did. It was kind of actually very sad when you listen to it now. But Houdini never said it wasn't true. He said he hadn't seen any hard proof it yet, and it was full of frauds. Unfortunately, when this thing became so big, it attracted so many gangsters who were out to get people's money and prey upon the desperate, just like cold readings today, just like that kind of thing. But spiritualism is a far more influential movement in terms of its effect on politics, technological development, and the growth of the paranormal than people even realize, and also played a huge part in things such as literature and that kind of thing, and also the symbolist painting movement. So spiritualism, although we don't hear much about these days, its legacy has been colossal. And even the likes of Swedenborg, he's still something of a religious movement in, well, kind of a philosophical spiritual movement in Scandinavia and Germany. He still has a tremendous influence. But yes, there was a tendency to believe the voices as being sincere in every single case. And this often led people who were driven by the most sincere motivations to take whatever they heard sincerely. And there was like tremendous cases of proof, like when William Butler Yeats joined the Golden Dawn with his wife Georgina, he was looking for absolute proof of, something beyond the material world. And one of them was a young girl that they'd found who could speak 9 languages that were channeled from a different, beings. And that was proof to him, was proof. So we probably wouldn't have the Forteana and the paranormal today if we didn't have a spiritual movement of that period. But there's also another aspect I want to bring in. Was the spiritualist movement created by humans as a kind of a new aspect of our nervous system in order to get us to develop things such as technology, radio, television, and so on? So it's a loaded subject with lots of caveats and different alleyways it can take you.
I was quite fascinated by the Harry Houdini and Arthur Conan Doyle feud, because I know that Doyle was a big believer in spiritualism, and he had interest in the psychic phenomena and mediumship. He was really, really big into that, and he became a big advocate for that, even going as far as to claim that he too had communicated with spirits through mediums. And then on the other side of the scale, you had Harry Houdini, who was also fascinated by the supernatural and the mysteries of the afterlife, but he was skeptical of mediums and psychics because he had a good understanding of illusion and deception because of his career as a magician. So he was quick to expose the fraudulent mediums because he believed they were preying on the vulnerable and the grieving. And the tension between them came to a head when Houdini began to start challenging Arthur Conan Doyle publicly to debunk the spiritualist practices. And he went on this mission just to expose the whole thing and how the tricks could be replicated through stage magic. And it even went so far where they were both in a series of public debates and exchanges, writing letters and articles via published newspapers and magazines. But the ironic thing was the Houdini Code. So after being a skeptic all his life, Houdini had left behind this challenge in the event of his death. And when he died in 1926, he said that he would bring a message to his wife with a secret code. And it was the secret code that they'd used in their mind reading act together on stage. After he'd passed, during a seance, a lady had come through claiming to be the mother of Harry Houdini Weiss, which was his real name, and she wanted to pass a message on. And she said that her and her son had also had a secret word between them that only his wife, Beatrice, knew about. And the word given was forgive. And then Beatrice, the wife, confirmed that that was correct. And in a later seance, Houdini actually came through and he said that he now was ready and wished to give his wife the secret code, which he'd promised he would do if it was possible for him to communicate from the other side. And he gave her the message. Sorry, it's in this book.
Is this the same book about reading?
Yeah, page 197. Yeah, the Houdini Code.
See, those of you watching this, we do our real study.
Yes, so the message read as follows. This is the message he brought from the grave in the seance. It said, Rosabelle, answer, tell, pray, answer, look, tell, answer, answer, tell. And the 9 words excluding Rosabelle spelled out a word using the code value, which was believe. And the other words corresponded to a secret spelling code used to pass information between a magician and his assistant during an act. And each word or word pair equaled a letter. And the word answer stood for the letter B. And answer stood for the letter V. And eventually the secret phrase spelled out the word believe. Beatrice confirmed that the code had been cracked and that that was the word. And when Houdini asked her to tell the seance participants what the word Rosabelle meant, she sang the song Rosabelle, which was the song she sang in their first show together. But did this confirm to the skeptics that we're able to communicate after death? No, because a journalist called Edward Churchill of the New York Evening Graphic declared the Ford seance a hoax, and he wrote a false accusation that Ford had admitted that he got the secret code from Mrs. Houdini. Ford, who was running the seance, he didn't pursue the accusation and he didn't deny or confirm it. So it was all blown out of the water.
Another aspect we have to look at in all this stuff too is Harry Houdini's family were immigrants to the US from Hungary, and they were Orthodox Jews. And Orthodox Jews, as we know from the Ivis Singer books, and which we'll do a show on at some point, have very strict prohibitions on talking with the dead or having anything like this. So that there may have been a religious clouding in that, especially as his mother had nearly disowned him for marrying a Catholic. And there was all kinds of neuroses there. The falling out with Conan Doyle is very tragic because he absolutely loved Arthur Conan Doyle. He wrote letters to him referring to him as his English father and things like this. And there was a genuine affection and love for Conan Doyle. But something happened to Houdini towards the end of his life. He became very cynical. He wrote, we spoke on other shows how he'd worked with Lovecraft on writing stories, including the famous one Under the Sphinx. But there was also other things they worked on. And one of them was supposed to take down spiritualism. And he wrote a check for $80 for an article back then, which was a lot of money back in 1920 something. But Houdini died. So Lovecraft never wrote a story. But Lovecraft wrote letters on Houdini, said that the guy was very close-minded and a bimbo, even though they were both sort of coming from the atheistic point of view. And but he saw Houdini as a very strange person who's full of contradictions, like a story of Beneath the Sphinx, Beneath the Pyramids, as it's called in some other cases, where he met this incredible being. Houdini claimed it was true, but Lovecraft laughed at him. So so Houdini was a man who was almost tortured by his own belief in the paranormal and the Fortean, in that he was trying to reconcile his belief in spiritualism and other states of being without kind of causing offense to his mother's Orthodox Jewish beliefs. Very, very big no-nos regarding contacting the dead and all this kind of thing. And the spiritual paranormal events are seen often as things like dibooks and demons and things like this. So I think there was a cultural hangover there with Houdini, and there was also a kind of a cultural hangover with Arthur Conan Doyle, having lost his son in World War I, and the family obviously devastated by it, and the desire to come through. I think it was almost like, it's like the thing we talked about Derek Acora a while back. He said, and we both said, like, even if it's not true, if it's helping people deal with loss in their families, what's the problem? And I think that's where Conan Doyle ultimately wanted to take this thing, that even if it's not true, it has a psychological help in it, in benefit in it. Houdini became more and more intransient, but he became darker. Towards the end of his life, he became a tortured man in many ways. So I think a lot of that, his raging against spiritualism was this internal conflict inside the guy,
But then can you blame him for being a little bit skeptical throughout his life when you had people like Madame Blavatsky?
Yeah, there was loads of frauds, especially the photographic frauds who were using double exposure on, where they would dress up in a ghost outfit, they would take a photograph with that, then put the plate back in the camera and then take a photograph of the person at the seance table. And it looked like there was a spirit behind him when it was just the double exposure of the previous plate, the same plate having previously been exposed to a woman in a wedding dress or something to make it look like a ghost. There was tons of that stuff, tons of that. But at the same, yeah, and I mean, that's healthy skepticism. If you're saying like, well, it might be true, but I'm not a route out there. But I think Houdini became a bit of a fanatic. I think, Arthur Conan Doyle, even in some of the letters, suggested that Houdini had an experience and lived in denial of it. Apparently, there was one letter, we read it out here on a previous show, Hocus Focus, where Conan Doyle said, how can you say that after we both received absolute proof in such a particular case? It was almost like Houdini did get confirmation, but it was too powerful for him or something. Maybe he was told he was going to die in an escape trick that went wrong. We don't know.
No, I think with this sort of thing, you can only really go off your own experiences as opposed to what people are telling you or showing you. I think it's quite a personal thing, spirit to be mediumships, the belief in the afterlife, whether you're communicating with spirit, it's quite a personal thing. So although somebody may say, well, I don't believe that, I think you're a fraud, the person that it's happening to, that could actually be happening to them, but I cannot prove it to you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you walk down a country road and you see a fairy or an alien or a dragon and only you saw it. How do you prove it? You can't,
And people are really really adept at giving their opinion or their scientific theory on something that they weren't even there to witness in the first place.
And also things change. Maybe we don't experience the spiritualist thing in the modern era because of all the electromagnetic pollution. I spoke recently online about how vampires don't exist anymore for the most part because of embalming and cremation. The bodies are destroyed. So it could be something similar to that as well. So tell us about your own personal experiences, Sarah.
I've attended a closed medium circle, and there were just three of us, three very, very close friends, one of which who led the circle and taught me how to kind of control and develop this. And she's been a medium all her life, and she's in her late 70s now. I don't do it to offer readings. I just do it. I developed it because I just felt I was able to receive messages as well as seeing ghosts and spirits all my life. So it's a very private part of my life. And I just use the ability sort of only for enriching my own life and developing my own psychic side, which as a result has become the main part of myself that I rely on. Now, I don't know if it's telepathy, mind power or spirit, but I believe it's spirit because I've seen spirit all my life and I know they exist. And so by that logic, in my own life, why shouldn't they be able to contact us if they want? And the spiritualist movement, I stay away from because I'm a solitary pagan and my beliefs and practices are quite private and personal to me. So I'm very wary of big groups and movements. And the amount of fraud that was uncovered in those early days, it just reminds us really that it's important not to believe everything we're told. And that's why I tend to stay away from the groups and societies.
Yeah, I feel the same way about it too. A few years ago, I was in America and the people that were there had asked me if I wanted to go to a spiritualist church in Massachusetts. And I said, no, I'm not interested in it. And they said, I thought like you'd be really into that. And I said, it depends. What are the spirits? And they were kind of like, oh, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah. I've never been to a spiritualist church. Never. And I've got the same kind of feelings about Ouija boards as well. I won't touch those. I absolutely refuse to mess with those. And a few years ago, I went on an overnight ghost hunt at a stately hall in Salford. And it was actually quite irresponsible of the people that ran it because they had the talking boards out and they were letting people use them pretty much as soon as the night started. And I refused and I stood to one side, just sort of observing what was going on. And the glass was moving for this group of women. And the name Ernest was spelt out and he was connected to the hall and the lady of the hall. And it was really quite surreal to see this glass moving and the look of bewilderment on these women's faces. So later on in the night, I decided to go off and have a walk around the hall on my own without all the theatrics and all the gadgets. So off I go for a wander around, and I come to the lady of the hall's bedroom. And on the outside of the bedroom, there's a painted portrait of her with some history about her. And I read that her head butler and confidant was a man called Ernest. And I went cold then, and I felt that the spirit of Ernest had probably led me there on my own to quietly confirm that he was real, while the others were playing with gadgets and talking to the spirits like they were performing animals, demanding that they show themselves and make noises on command.
Well, a Ouija board is basically a
Portal.
well. When you open a Ouija board, the demon world, it's the lowest level demons see it, and they rush towards it. It's like the way moths run through a flame. The lowest level entities in the demon world, in the astral realms, will make a route one to the Ouija board. And they'll tell you anything you want to hear. Anything you want to hear, they'll tell you. So that was extremely unethical and dangerous of a so-called ghost hunting group to bring something like that into a place.
Yeah, there was groups of people all around using them, and they asked me why am I not joining in? And I said, I just don't want to mess with them. And they just shrugged their shoulders and whatever.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Ouija boards get nothing but demons. There's nothing but demons there, and people. It doesn't matter if they think they're talking to aliens or ghosts or anything. It's only demons that you get. You get nothing else when the Ouija board except demons. Nothing else.
I agree. I won't even have one in the house. I won't go near them. Won't touch them. Nothing to do with.
As soon as you take them out of the box and open them, it's like a flashlight goes off in the lower realms of the etheric world, of the astral world. Sorry, and these things that are trapped, desperate to harvest energy, will swarm right towards it. It's like it as soon as you open it, and that shape has, because they've learned over the last 100 odd years or so that that's a way they can get vulnerable people.
And these things are sold as toys in toy shops as well.
Yeah, I used to have a pair of underpants that had a Ouija board on it, or a boxer short years ago. I didn't really think about it, but it's funny to think about that. I wouldn't wear them now, but it was like, and I used to play in a band, and I would wear the shorts on stage, because I thought they were cool looking. But looking back on it now, I'm kind of, it's kind of weird now when I think about it, But I mean, nothing ever happened, but certainly wouldn't do it now.
The other thing I wanted to bring in was table tipping. Now, I've done table tipping, and I've also seen one person who's a family member who's very sensitive put the hand on the table by themselves, and the table literally tipped on two legs and looked like it was stuck to the hand magnetically. And the table was kind of dancing round in a small circle. And I saw it, and it happened. And whether it was spirit or whether it was working with this person's energy like a pendulum or a dowser, I don't know. But that table was defying the laws of gravity, and it was tipping and spinning while this person had the hands just lightly on the surface.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been to anything like that, and I think maybe a part of me is, I kind of like. I think the Orthodox Jews are right that you should just leave the dead alone and stop trying to talk to them and deal with them.
But like I say, with the tests that these researchers do, I don't think it's something that you can test. And one of the reasons why I think it's difficult for science to prove this stuff, as with all the researchers from the Victorian time, because I think there's an element of trust between the spirit and who they're communicating with. And if that spirit doesn't want to be discovered or exploited by science, then it won't. And the problem here is that people have this obsession or need to be believed to prove something. And so when supernatural activity doesn't pan out in a cold clinical research setting, they feel embarrassed and resort to fraud, not necessarily because they're untrustworthy or charlatans, although there are a few of them about, but because they know.
Like the Cotton girls. They fake the fairy thing because they were so frustrated.
Yeah, they know what they've experienced to be real and true to them, and they'll go to any lengths to prove it. Whereas, like for myself, I know what I've experienced, but I don't feel the need to prove it, to prove anything. I don't care if people believe, because it changes nothing for me and what I've seen and experienced. And I think
And
that's why.
and the recently deceased, the bereaved have to be careful they don't trap their loved ones in Bardo. That they are here for 10 days or so, whatever the time period is. And if they immediately start contacting them, they might trap them in Bardo and not allowing their spirit to move on to reincarnation or whatever the next thing is for them.
Yeah, so it's like you say, it's multifaceted. There's lots of ethics as well to consider.
Big time.
So that's the first topic for this evening, spiritualism. And if you've got any thoughts or views or experiences with this sort of stuff yourself, maybe you go to a spiritualist church, or you've been to see a medium, or you are a medium, it'd be very interesting to see your comments and your views on the subject in the comments below. This week, we are reviewing the 1970s Hammer film production, The Horror of Frankenstein, starring Ralph Bates, Kate O'Mara, Veronica Carlson, and Dennis Price. And this particular adaptation of Mary Shelley's classic brings a mix of both horror and humour. The film follows the young scientist Victor Frankenstein as he sets out to conquer death and create life. Victor Frankenstein, played by Ralph Bates, is an arrogant genius with a penchant for women and getting his own way. So he's furious when his father puts an end to his anatomical pursuits by not allowing him to go to the university in Vienna to study anatomy. So he tampers with his father's shotgun and it explodes in his father's face and kills him. And Victor inherits the title of Baron von Frankenstein, along with the family fortune and castle. And driven by his newfound riches and resources, he goes to the medical school at the university in Vienna. But because he thinks he can do what he wants when he wants, he's reckless and he gets the daughter of the dean pregnant. So he has to make a hasty return back to the castle, claiming the best thing he can do with responsibilities is to run away from them. And so off he goes into the night, leaving the poor girl in a mess. And it's here that Victor's dark intentions take shape, and he sets up a laboratory and starts conducting macabre experiments to reanimate the dead tissue of animals. And he eventually assembles a patchwork body made from a selection of human parts, and he breathes life into this creation using galvanization. Then the monster escapes and goes on a murderous frenzy of the village and terrorizes everyone. And I'm not going to spoil the ending, but there is a twist of fate at the end that brings it all to a stop, and peace is once again restored to the village, but not without the cost of many innocent lives. Now, the film was made with a mix of horror and humour in the first part, and it reminded me somewhat of the escapades from the Carry On films, with the amusing interaction between Victor and the female characters. Great characters. Ralph Bates reminded me of Colin Firth, and of course, Kate O'Mara and Veronica Carlson were both dressed in the classic Hammer girl style. But I want to compare this adaptation to Mary Shelley's classic. And while the film The Horror of Frankenstein and Mary Shelley's novel do share the central theme of a scientist's creation of life, they approach the plot and themes in very different ways. The film takes a more comical approach, focusing on Victor's rebellious and spoilt nature, whereas Shelley's novel goes into the deep philosophical questions surrounding science, ethics, and the human experience. And the novel also looks at Victor's own internal struggles and consequences of his actions, especially in regards to the creature. And I have some other points in regards to the original story, which I'll talk about later. But for now, The Horror of Frankenstein is great entertainment, a classic Hammer horror, Lots of pretty girls in there, and even Victor von Frankenstein was quite dashing. The sets were remarkably good for the time, and the costumes were brilliant. Oh, and one other thing, the grave robber and his wife, they were really funny. He was very posh, and he'd sit on the ground with a picnic basket and a blanket, eating pate and drinking wine, while his wife is in the hole. She was working class, and she was in the hole digging up the graves and doing all the work. And they were just talking about the day and what was for dinner tomorrow, like it was the most natural thing in the world, while she's digging the grave and he's there stuffing his face with fancy food.
I had not seen the film until you suggested we watch it, and it's tremendously entertaining. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. I wouldn't call it a typical, in my case, as far as I'm concerned, from what I know, I wouldn't call it a typical Hammer film. You don't get a lot of humor in Hammer films, really, like that. That was bordering on carry on screaming at times, definitely. The character who played Victor Hugo, for me, reminded me of Paul Darrow, who played Avon and Blake Seven, with those kinds of like sardonic quips and this kind of thing, which was very funny. And he was very good in the role. And but he was a horrible man as well. Look how he tried to frame up young was it Stefan, the autistic guy who, after being kind of a failure in life, discovered he was a brilliant chef. And he was so charming. It was very Patrick Bateman, wasn't it, from American Psycho? He was so loving and charming to Stefan when he discovered he could be a great cook. Want to make sure he was paid well, but then didn't think nothing about stitching up for a possible death sentence for murder. And yeah, I mean, it didn't even look like a Hammer film to me, other than the costumes. It was very, very brightly lit. Everything was direct, full on light, so you didn't get that kind of like luscious kind of warm tones that you get normally in them. But yeah, it was just fantastic entertainment. It was a lot of fun, I have to say, as well as it just had so much going on. It just goes to show the diversity of the Frankenstein genre. It really does, that you can take it all different ways. The last thing I watched regarding Frankenstein's was the fantastic, I think it was made by CBS. It was a streaming one with Sean Bean, called The Frankenstein Chronicles. And it was like a detective story taking place in London in the early 1800s, involving things like Dipple and William Blake and all that stuff. And it was amazing. So it just goes to show you, you can take you can take Frankenstein any way you want. And they took it a whole different way in this one. The monster was almost like superfluous to the story. The monster was like irrelevant almost compared to everything that was going on. And yeah, I mean, it was a great surprise to me. I didn't think that this film was going to go the way it did. And it had this kind of like dilemma, moralistic resolve at the end, that you were kind of like open ended. Are we going to get a sequel or something? But uh, he was a monster. He was a horrible person. He was a horrible person. He kills his father. He kills his best friends, and he kills that awful undertaker, the guy who got to rob the bodies. And that was actually a funny scene. That I mean, there's like dark humor. But yeah, I totally recommend this film as a really great popcorn and beer Saturday night DVD. It really has everything.
He was a bigger monster than the monster.
He definitely was. But he started out, but he was so full of compassion and love in other ways. Like he starts out, you think, oh, he's a real, yeah, he's an arrogant guy who knows he's a genius, but he's so kind to his friends who have less than him. It was almost like, have you noticed that as soon as he became an aristocrat, he became a monster? Before he became an aristocrat, he was actually a nice guy. So it was almost like a statement there on that. Like as soon as he was called Baron, the evil came out of him.
Even his best friend said, you can be so cold sometimes and then so warm at other times. I'm having difficulty discovering which is the real you.
That's like the Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. He was the kind of forerunner of that, but you could tell that he was having a lot of fun playing that role. It was always like he's a smirk on his face the whole time. But yeah,
Yes.
at his laboratory, I love his laboratory. And then there was the poor turtle. Remember that
Oh,
the
yes.
tortoise. What was his name? Frederick or something. And it was
Oh,
like well, he brought the tortoise back to life though. But it was like the guy that had the tortoise really loved him as his pet and everything. So, like I said, the film has literally everything.
yeah, that was the girl, the blonde girl and her father, wasn't it? And he had the tortoise and he said, I love my tortoise. It's the perfect pet. It doesn't do much, it doesn't eat much. You don't have to take it for walks and you don't have to do this. And I thought, well, what is the point of this pet, really? It's just something to look at and put on your knee. And he was stroking it, and then the poor thing got kidnapped.
Yeah,
But
I,
thankfully,
I've
the
been
turtle was okay.
I've been to the real Frankenstein's castle. It's actually the tram line out of Darmstadt in Hesse in Germany. The last stop on the line is called Frankenstein, and you can walk up to the hill to. It's a good long walk though, to the Frankenstein's castle at the top, and it was a guy called Dipple was there, and he invented an elixir that was capable of bringing people back from the dead. But I've got a film about it on Beyond Room 313. But I hiked up the top of the mountain, and it was a really rough hike. And I'm in like hardcore Germany, the Odenwald. There's deer and wolves and bears and everything around me. And then I get up to the top, and there was this fantastic pub restaurant on the top of the mountain. That was like I had this like one of the best lunches I've ever had in my life. And it was like it was typical Germany, you think you're in the wild somewhere, and all of a sudden there's a beautiful pub or something with like gorgeous blonde girls serving like wonderful meals.
So that was some civilization.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah, I mean it was, but the buildings were just amazing. They were like a real life version of Hammer like buildings, Gothic architecture and stuff, but also spooky Germanic architecture.
Yeah, yeah. I know what you mean. They have that aesthetic, don't they?
Yeah. The towers with the pointed domes on them, and the kind of like long barricaded walls built out of rocks, which this kind of thing. Oh yeah, absolutely. And then you can walk down to the hill and get on a tram and go back into the city. It's just surreal actually. But yeah, the film is definitely something. It's got me thinking about it since you suggested it. I think we should do at some point a one topic show on the entire Frankenstein thing, like because I think there's a huge amount of fodder there. Exploring things like galvanism and stuff like that. I know we've touched on it before, but I think that's we could look at different kinds of films and different interpretations and so on.
There's not many Frankenstein movies that actually follow the book, because the book's presented in a series of letters from like multiple perspectives from the brother and sister. I think, is he called Captain Robert? I can't
Yeah,
remember
the
the
what you call it,
captain's
the one
name.
with Kenneth Branagh and Aidan Quinn from the '90s is pretty good. That follows it pretty closely. Robert De Niro plays the monster.
And in the book, Victor was obsessed with creating this perfect being, wasn't he?
It was the Prometheus thing, wasn't it? Like the fire of the gods to create life.
Yes, and it's got some transhumanist elements in there. But
I highly recommend the film. Don't expect horror, don't expect anything particularly deep, but just have an enjoyable movie moment because it definitely delivers. Absolutely.
it does. It's great entertainment, and if you're a fan of the Carry On genre, then you'll really like this.
Oh, well, when Kate O'Mara bends over after he comes back from college, and he goes, my, how you developed, and her cleavage sticks out. That was pure Carry On.
Yeah, when he said you put weight, I see you put a bit of weight on in two
That
places.
was yeah.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Highly recommended.
Well, now we have the maven of metaphysical cleanliness. It's Sarah with the psychic hygiene.
When we have a cluttered space, our attention is constantly pulled in multiple directions, and our minds can become scattered, making it difficult to concentrate on specific tasks. Our surroundings have a big influence on us, and our living spaces are more than just physical environments. Very often, our external environments reflect the state of our mind internally. And clearing out physical clutter can also clear out mental clutter. A tidier environment can boost our energy levels and motivation to take on new challenges or pursue goals. Cluttered and disorganized surroundings can create chaos and unease, leading to feelings of overwhelm and mental fog. On the other hand, a well-organized, clutter-free space brings about a sense of calmness, clarity, and mental focus. Organizing and decluttering can feel overwhelming, especially if you've accumulated a lot of stuff over the years. So if you decide to look at this, then begin with a small, manageable area like a drawer or a shelf, and let your success there help you tackle any larger spaces. When you sort through your belongings, ask yourself, does this item spark joy? Be aware of the emotional attachment that you have with each item. And if it brings you happiness and positive memories and you use it, keep it. Otherwise, if it brings you nothing, then just lovingly toss it from your life, because letting go can be liberating, and it'll create a space in your home for fresh energy to come in. Sometimes we hold on to items out of guilt or obligation. Let go of those emotional burdens, and remember, it's okay to part with gifts or belongings that no longer resonate with us. The act of decluttering is an act of self-love. And by donating unwanted items and gifts, instead of holding on to them through guilt, we can participate in a cycle of abundance, where the things that we release from our lives can find a new purpose and value somewhere else instead of stagnating. And I want to include a little disclaimer at the end here. I'm not advocating for anybody to go and get rid of all the stuff. The decision to declutter and organise should always be made with careful consideration to your personal circumstances. And it's definitely not advisable to impulsively get rid of all belongings without thoughtful reflection. And under no circumstances is it right to get rid of somebody else's stuff without their permission. And that's my psychic hygiene tip for this week.
Well, thanks for that, Sarah, mainly because you've made me feel fucking guilty. Because I'm like Francis Bacon's studio in real life. That's what makes, I'm not very well, I'm not even close to being, I don't want to be organized that way. And I live with like piles of books and everything just randomly stacked around. In fact, when I used to work in business, a colleague came into my office one day and he says, how the fuck do you actually work in this place? It's just piles of files and books, and everything's piled up, and everything had post-it notes on it. And I picked it up, and I picked up a big pile of documents, and there was a post-it notes on it. You see, that's a database. I know exactly what's in here following the post-it notes. So I think it's a personal thing, I'm not that kind of person, but I do think the spring cleaning thing and all that stuff is great. But I'm a complete apostate when it comes to that kind of thing. I like the piles of books and the piles of documents and the piles of everything. And there's a reason for that. There's another reason for that. Not only am I fine with it because I know what's in there, I know where to find the things, but also there's things I forget. And wading through a pile of stuff, I might find a magazine or a book I bought 10 years ago that I never read. And I go, wow. And it's just sort of like a joy. So there's a magic in that too. So yeah, I agree completely. Very important what you said. No one has the right to clean up someone else's stuff. That's a very violating thing to do. And Otherwise, it's a personal thing. For me, I'm happy with chaos and that kind of thing, but I know where everything is and how to find it.
It's definitely a personal thing. And no means am I an advocate for getting rid of everything and having a minimal space with minimal stuff. I mean, organized chaos is decluttering really, because it's tidy to what you need. So you just have a straighten around and clear out what you don't use. But by no means, no, I don't mean go and throw all your books away and all your DVDs and all that stuff away, because I'm the same. I have books all over the place, DVDs out all over the place. I was thinking more of stuff that we don't use, we don't need, really.
Yeah, I'm down with all that kind of thing. Yeah, but and I've gotten rid of some of the books that I didn't really need. But I can't say enough good things about post-it notes. One of the greatest inventions that ever was invented was post-it notes. And if you're comfortable, I mean, I'm just looking around me now. It's like a bomb hit this place. Not it's not dirt or anything, but it's like just piles of books and stuff. I mean, it makes me very happy. It makes me. These are my non-earthly children. You know.
I mean, I've got books to the left of me, to the right of me, and on this table and things like that. But that's my workspace for me. That's not for decluttering. But maybe a shoe cupboard, or if you got how many, if you've got 7 black jumpers, how many do you need? That kind of thing.
Yeah, like Imelda Marcos's shoes.
Yeah, stuff for the sake of
Yeah,
stuff.
with
Not
clothes, I'm really good with that. Like I have 2 pairs of really expensive shoes and that I wear for special occasions, and that's it. And everything else is just like rubbish. So yeah, I think there's with clothes and stuff like that. I definitely agree with that part of it. I mean, I don't understand these people that have tons of clothes and stuff like that, or who save ketchup packages from McDonald's and they build up boxes of them. That's something wrong there when that goes on.
yeah.
But
So
yeah, I think that would be the real. That's definitely a spiritual issue there with that kind of hoarding of nonsense that they'll never use. And but again, it's not your job to go to someone's special place and do it for them. It's wrong.
no, you mustn't do that. And again, just to reiterate, I'm not advocating don't throw your books out, don't throw your DVDs out, don't throw your CDs out. Keep all those, because if they cancel it all digitally online, you've got nothing. But they can't cancel your DVDs, and they can't cancel your books, your physical books. So they are really, really precious. So I would think twice before doing that.
Our second topic for tonight's Hocus Focus is concerning the concept of the hollow earth, the inner earth, or the internal worlds below the Earth's surface. There's a great variation in this topic and also a great level of misunderstanding too. And on some levels, it's probably true. In fact, I think I know it is from personal experience. But I'll get to that in a little while. Our modern understanding of the hollow earth comes from the astronomer Sir Edmund Halley, who discovered Halley's Comet. And he believed that the earth had inside it either one or multiple interior spaces that were possibly lit by an internal source. In other words, you had the curvature on the outside of the earth, but you're going to have a curvature on the inside. Think of like onion layers with gaps between the layers. There was also other concepts that developed later on regarding the concept of the earth being almost turned inside out, with the interior of the earth lining along the crust on the inside, and in the center a central sun, which is accessible by holes in the North and the South Pole. This became a very central thing in latter-day Buddhism, and also led the Third Reich to launch numerous expeditions both to the North and South Pole, as well as even Tibet, in order to find the interior entrance into the earth. But it's a little more subtle and far less science fiction-y than that has been presented so far. Here in Ireland, Irish folklore is saturated with the concept of an inner world. Now, we know we have it in other cultures. We have hell in the Nordic pantheon, and we have Sheol in the Hebrew concept of the inside of the earth, the lower underworlds. In Ireland, we have stories such as Cruachan and Owen-Negat Cave, which I've climbed down myself a couple of times. We have St. Patrick's Purgatory in Lough Erne, and we have other places such as the Gollum's Cave in County Clare, where J.R. Tolkien got the idea for the Gollum from, used in the Lord of the Rings. And I'm going to talk about two personal experiences I had with the Hollow Earth that convinced me that they both exist. The first one was when I first visited Owen-Negat Cave in Cruachan in County Roscommon in Ireland. The cave is just basically a hole underneath a field that had once had a very large ceremonial entrance that Christians probably destroyed about 1700 years ago. You can actually see the flagstones lying on the ground. The Christians called it the entrance to hell, where the Morrigan, the raven goddess, emerged on Samhain, Halloween. So the first time I went down that, it was quite intimidating because it's not like potholing. It's just, there's enough room to go down on your hunkers. But the impression that I got going down into the cave was a sensation that I was going through an actual doorway. This was the entrance into a much larger complex area, literally a portal, but a real flesh and blood one made from stone. And at the bottom of the cave, you go down this long tunnel, and it's in pitch black. There's no lights, there's no safety equipment, there's no nothing. And when you get to the bottom, there's a kind of an uncomfortable drop that leads you into this area that looks almost like an underground cathedral. And the first thing I'm struck by is that all around you, the signs of rockfall, that beyond the stones in front of you in Owen-Negat Cave, which means the Cave of the Cats, that there is more. This goes on forever. And there was always a great belief in the area that there was a whole underground subterranean world that connected this part of Ireland, especially as far as the caves of Kesh and Sligo, which are 40 miles away, via this massive subterranean world. Now, this is really what the inner earth is. It's not a hollow in the center of the earth, but it's a complex series of caves that I believe that people once lived in. And I believe there's a large truth to the stories of the Vrilya, which was a fictional novel that talks about these angelic beings that lived in the center of the earth and had the power of Vril. And there's very similar stories in the Irish pantheon. St. Patrick's Purgatory up in Donegal on the island, when you go down into the hole in the ground, to this day you cannot access to it. The Catholic Church have shut these caves off, which I find very interesting, why you're not allowed access to them. But the final icing on the cake for me was about 7 or 8 years ago when I visited the Hypogeum Halsapalini in Malta. Now, this is just in a regular neighborhood in Palo in Malta. And it's just like a regular Maltese neighborhood, like old Victorian houses. But back in the day when these houses were being built, the cistern was being dug in the basement of a house as a water collection system. And they broke through and fell into a huge cave system and discovered what is the most remarkable. I can hardly talk about it when you get down there. It's 5,500 years old, they say. I think it's older. And what you're left with is basically architecture that's the level of what the Greeks and the Romans made, dug out of the rock underground. And it's very difficult to visit the Hypogeum Halsapalini now because they have limited access. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You have to book your tickets long in advance. And I was lucky that I got in on the fly because I was on a film crew. So I went down, and as soon as I entered into the place, I felt like I've just entered the inner earth. That was my initial experience, sensation inside me. And they have a place inside it called the Holies of the Holy, which that's what they call it. And the Jesuits completely own the narrative on this place because they excavated it. And in this Holy of the Holies is a sound temple that has remarkable acoustic effects. And you're shown all this by the guides who watch you like you're inside Fort Knox. Small groups of people go in, you're not allowed to film, and in front of you is like a guard, and behind you is like a guard, so you can't do anything. Eventually, you're taken to the very end, what they call the end, and you're looking at what is a dock, and then there's caves, massive cave systems continue from that point on, but they're naturalistic. They're not like carved. They're underground caves with stalagmites and stalagmites and all those kinds of things. And it's a dock. It's a dock. You take a boat, and you take this boat to go into the interior of Malta. Now, back in the 1920s, I believe, a group of school children vanished underneath there, and they were beckoned in by a giant, a strange-looking being. And this was actually covered in the National Geographic magazine. And for months later, the screams of these people could be heard underneath the ground through holes. They could never find them. And the National Geographic reported this because people wanted to know why the Maltese weren't hiding in their cave systems during the Allied bombings of the island. The simple reason was that was the inner earth, and there were beings down there, giants, that were not human, as a sense. There's also another series of caves, Gardalam in Malta on the other end of the island. That's a very interesting cave structure as well, that also suggests that it goes on further than what you're allowed to visit. And this, between the Irish ones and this one, and also the numbers of caves that have been found all over Europe and passageways that are not, you wouldn't put them in the genre of a natural cave in terms of like potholing or caving. They're literally underground worlds that are probably all interconnected at one time. And maybe humans went down there at a time when the sun gave off a lot of radiation. There's lots of folklore stories like this. And the inner earth story tends to forget about this aspect of it, that there was another world that existed under the ground. So the hollow earth thing to me is very much a red herring, but the inner world is very much a real thing. And when you visit these places such as Cruachan and the Hypogeum Halsaphalini, you're left in no doubt that there is a world below the Earth's surface that strangely was considered forbidden in when I say the modern world, I say from the pre-Christian time on. But all true mythology talks about this going under the ground, the people under the earth, the world under the earth. And I still believe it exists. I've no doubt about it. And I often wonder about these military installations that are built under the ground, where they're taking advantage of these systems. And there is a world under there they're not telling us about. In England in recent years, particularly in the south of England, from the Midlands down towards Somerset, strange, massive military underground bases have been constructed that no one knows the purpose of. And the inner earth thing is full of distractions, and the distractions are often to remove you from the real thing. I'm a firm believer that there's an inner world, that there was inner civilizations inside it. And I do believe, and we'll be reviewing the Borderlands movie shortly, that's also part of it, that they blocked these caves with Christian sites and called them evil. They called them hell. They called them the underworld. There was something down there, another version of the world, that I think when you went down further, not only did it get warmer, but you also had sources of light. These sources of light may have been brought about by things like quartz, or even forms of fungus or lichen that can actually emit light and grow and glow in the dark. Now, we know there was a cave in Romania that was sealed off for 2 million years, and when it was opened up, they found it full of animals, but the animals had adapted to live in this new dark. I believe that inside the interior of this earth are human beings that have adapted to live in the dark. And it's one conspiracy theory I do totally believe in, that we've been kept hidden from, because doesn't serve many particularly religious and Darwinian agendas. So that's my feeling on the inner earth, Sarah. I have very personal belief in it, and I have no doubt there's something very, very real going on with it.
I have a theory. When the earth first came into being, then it would have been uninhabitable. So at that point, they say that life always finds a way. So maybe the atmosphere and environment on the earth when it first came into being was such that life found a way underground.
Yep. Yep.
And it evolved into this civilization that lives in the inner earth. And it's just possible that perhaps us on the top have somehow evolved from those in the inner earth. And as the atmosphere has changed and the environment's changed and it's become less volatile with the tilt of the earth and everything, that we've kind of evolved from however life found a way from the inner earth. And that's really
Yeah.
where we come from, if you like. We don't come from Neanderthal man, and that would put Darwin's theory of evolution to bed, wouldn't it? And they don't want you to know that, if that's not true, because there's another theory there, conspiracy theory there, that that's actually not true, the theory of evolution. So it could be that we evolved from the beings of the inner earth.
Yeah, I mean, what you said there about life finds a way, all you have to do is look at the bottoms of the deepest oceans. When before robots and submersibles were invented, they thought that the bottom of the oceans would be sterilized because nothing could survive the cold and incredible pressure. And if it was microscopic creatures. And when they got down to the bottom of the oceans, what they discovered, large complex animals like sharks and octopuses are somehow able to live down there, despite, and they still don't know, it's still not understood how they survive. Despite the incredible pressure of the water and the cold, they're still able to swim and move around and live, and their nervous system functions. The tenacity of life on their extremities is astounding, and it seems that genetic mutations, whatever they are, adaptability seems to happen much more quickly than the case of hundreds of thousands or millions of years. It can literally happen over a few generations. And the cave in Romania seems to suggest that you don't need incredible lengths of time for mutations to adapt to and change in the environment. So yeah, I totally believe in that there was some cataclysm drove them under the earth and then they came back up. And that would explain all these stories about humans emerging from the soil and things like that.
And the giants as well, if those people underneath the earth, or those beings underneath, are giants, because there's been lots of folklore stories about giants on the surface of the earth.
When I was researching for Walpurgis Night, one of the things that struck me was because the National Socialists said to the scientists, you can do whatever you want, the real books are torn up. And you think like, yeah, and they developed all this technology, new types of aircraft, new types of everything. They're like the engineering within the Third Reich was spectacular. And why? Because they were told that they could work with a blank slate. And they were building rockets in no time and everything. But it seemed to me that anthropologists and archaeologists, I mean, I've been to Philipsburg Castle, they were obsessed with the inner earth. Now, they wouldn't have been obsessed with the inner earth if there wasn't some evidence there. These are German scientists, they're practical people, and that they would definitely be only interested in something that was some kind of experimentation that led to them to believe that. And this is what I think sent them down there. This is what sent them into Tibet and everything. They were looking for the entrance into the inner earth. Now, we had a show about Antarctica, and maybe they ended up there, but maybe they also ended up in the inner earth as well. And so many of these sort of UFO sightings seem to happen around where there's massive cave systems, like the Phoenix Lights and stuff like that. And also the mountains here, Karakeel, which is a massive UFO hotspot and full of ancient sites and caves in the mountains. In fact, it's connected to those caves that, and the one I spoke about earlier on the show, that go all the way to Onagot Krukon, that are supposed to be under the ground. And the way the Christians made they made the Christians forbode people from going into these caves, and created all kinds of stories that were demons and everything inside them. Makes me believe that they were afraid of something down there that they didn't want the people to find out about, which could very well, we could be the descendants of the earth dwellers rather than the other way around.
Yeah. And that would also put to bed the theory of the ancient aliens as well, wouldn't it? Because the technology that we had in the ancient times, like the pyramids, that could have come from the people, or the people that are living in the inner earth.
Well, if you think what's under there, like you get out of sunlight, okay, and you go into complete darkness, if you can find water and a source of food, and there are vast like aquifers, you don't know if there's fish and everything, and we don't know what's in them, algae, you would have people over a period of time would adapt. Remember, it's very warm down there. There's no cold. There's no extremities of cold and heat. They would develop their senses, like their hearing better. They would develop things like the ability to smell better, and their eyes just wouldn't be used anymore. So they would basically, their eyes would stop being used, and they may even use their nervous system in a different way to actually negotiate their way around and experience their environment almost like a 3D picture inside their own cognition that they see almost like a sonogram or something. So there you go. I mean, and like lots of reptiles do that as well, where the nervous system becomes like a sort of a proximity sensor.
Yeah, because the moles live underground, don't they? They can't see, they're blind when they
Yeah.
come to the surface, and they find other ways to get around.
Yeah,
because
they use
they've
their
adapted.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you said, life will always find a way, and the inner earth to me is, maybe we're the mutants, maybe we're the ones, maybe the real. You never know. Maybe the real world is down there. You often wonder, like, if you think about the size of the earth and you have caves. I mean, this would explain all the folklore, like the pixies in Cornwall, where the miners would be digging and they would hear tappings and bangings on the other side, and they said there was like beings living in complementary caves near the mines under the sea. I mean, it's a whole. There was a film made. I think was it called The Abyss, where about these girls they go or The Descent, where these bunch of girls go mining they go caving. I think it's in some place in West Virginia or somewhere, and they go really deep into the earth, and they discover that there's cannibalistic beings who have no eyes and they're former humans. This kind of thing. Now, it might also explain a lot of cryptids as well. They only come out at certain times, and then they vanish. Maybe they vanish back under the ground.
Would make sense. Make a lot of sense, that with the cryptids. They just pop up. And it also begs the question, is that why the billionaires are so obsessed with places like Antarctica?
And building underground seed vaults and building massive underground tunnel networks. That's been going right back to Bill Cooper. He said he had information that they had these nuclear boring machines that would melt rock and build vast tunnel systems. And when I lived in New York, that famous building in Astoria that has no windows, there was always rumors that had tunnel systems that went under the river into New Jersey and everything that were only accessible to the CIA. And we're kept blind to all this. We're told to look up at spaceships, look up for alien disclosure, look up for all this stuff, and yet the real truth is probably could be under our feet.
Probably down there. Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing that was found very interesting, that the cave at Owenigat, the first Irish president carved his initials on the descent into the cave walls. And it was like, why was he so interested in this place? Douglas Hyde, his name is still there to this day. And he carved his initials on the wall. And his full name is there on the wall to this day. It was like you had these people who were intellectuals and top politicians, and they're all interested in these underground places. You often wonder what's under those like royal palaces, like the one in Scotland, like Prince Charles, like what's under there. And the stories of like Edinburgh too, that those mountains, that mountain that Edinburgh is built on, is all full of caves. So that's basically how I feel about the inner earth. I'd be interested to know you people, your own theories. And even if you live in a place like West Virginia or somewhere where there's cave systems, anywhere in the world where you've been, Tell us about it and these stories you have, because I think the folklore is actually closer to the truth than anything else. So, I think also that the inner earth thing, especially with the psyop around the alien stuff that's going on right now, and that turns out to be a big red herring, that people might finally start looking below their feet.
So now it's time for the man who can read the psychic weather like an open book. He's got you covered better than a Renfield rain mac, and he can escort you gently through the turbulent psychic winds. So sit back, relax, and let our resident psychic weatherman guide you through any twists and turns for the week ahead's cosmic weather, cosmic climate.
What makes the psychic weather different than the climatic weather forecast is that the climatic weather forecast, even if nothing is happening, they sex it up by saying the weather's really stormy. If there's a bit of wind, they'll say it's dangerous of hurricanes. If there's a bit of heat, they'll say dangerous of wildfires. The psychic weather, I don't do it like that. Literally, when there's no psychic weather, in terms of anything standing out, I will say it. And that's what we're having right now. Right now, there is nothing happening in the psychic world in terms of fluctuations, changes, or spikes. There's nothing going on. It is very, very neutral. Is that a good thing? Maybe. Is it a bad thing? I don't know. Sometimes when you can have extreme psychic weather, it can be very useful. It's almost like seeing a storm coming in the distance. You can pull your stuff in and bolt down the hatches. But there's nothing happening at the moment. And that's the psychic weather with me, Thomas Sheridan.
So we've got a bit of a respite from the
respite, or some people say to stand, calm before the storm. But some weeks, some months, there's just nothing. It's just there's an element of the sine wave is flat. That's what it's like right now.
Right. As we turn the page to this week's book review section, we are once again sharing a peek into our reading realm. Our bookshelves over the years have become portals to encounters with other worlds, magical realms, and all things Fortean. And like a finely aged whiskey, our bookshelves get better as the years go by. And we hope to inspire you for your next edition to help fill your bookshelves with top-notch content. And if after the show you want to buy any of the books we review from our personal collections, we'll put the affiliate links to the books in the description box so you can purchase it and help support our show with a few pennies that we'll get as a result of the sale. And now my book review for this week is The Complete Book of Fortune, The Secrets of the Past, Present and Future Revealed. And it's authorless because it's a facsimile compilation of many authors' works from a very, very long time ago. And it brings together some of the most popular subjects of occult sciences into a user-friendly, enormous, big, fat volume in order to be easily accessible. And it's a big resource full of various mystical arts. And the book teaches you how to use both tarot and regular playing cards for divination and gives you lots of spreads to try out. It also goes into the best days to do readings for the most accurate results. And it goes into palmistry, phrenology, numerology, and the art of fortune telling through tea leaves. There's also a section on the realm of dream interpretation and intuitive divination using crystal gazing. The sections deciphering the meanings hidden within Christian names, flowers, colours, handwriting, precious stones. And there's a piece about using moles and birthmarks for divination. as well as the mysterious powers of talismans and amulets, oracles, omens, and even popular superstitions. And I just want to read a section from a page here about the meaning of moles for divination. Right, so this is about divining with moles. So belief in the divinatory meaning of moles, birthmarks, and similar marks upon the human skin has been sanctified by a tradition that originated in very early times. The general opinion seems to be that these strange little growths are, in some way that is at present obscure, impressed upon the body by astrological influences at the moment of birth, or upon the embryo at the time of conception. Whatever may be their cause, there is little room for doubting that they are capable of furnishing interpretations of considerable value concerning the character and destiny of the person upon whom they appear. The results of the patient and laborious effect of innumerable workers who have directed their energies over a period of many centuries to the observation and comparison of moles and the various traits and happenings with which they seem to be associated in human character and destiny have been collected by us for the benefit of the reader and are presented in the following pages. No discrimination need be made between moles and what are commonly termed birthmarks, for both originated in exactly the same way. The interpretation of moles and birthmarks depends upon two factors: their actual physical appearance and the part of the subject's body upon which they appear. Physical appearance is determined by four particulars: size, shape, colour, and degree of hairiness, and the meanings of which, from the divinatory point of view, are as follows on the following pages. And I'm not going to go into them all, but basically you can divinate your destiny by the size of a mole, the shape of it, and how many hairs it's got in there. And it's absolutely fascinating. There's pages and pages, and it goes on to where they appear on the body and what that can mean. It's literally 6 or 7 pages full of mole divination. And it's brilliant. And as well as being a textbook for various divination practices, it also reminds the readers of the important fact that forecasts, while indicative, are not certainties. And it highlights the importance of our own personal power in shaping our fate. So there's sections in here that remind us that not every divination outcome is set in stone. So not to put too much reliance on everything that it says.
Yeah, looks like a handy reference book.
It's great.
The artwork looks very 1980s.
It is from the 80s, this edition. Yeah. I mean, the original work is from way back. Like I say, it's a facsimile collection. And the unusual part of this book is not even the mole divination. It's a whole section of this book that is the translation of Napoleon's Book of Fate, which was the manuscript rumoured to have been taken from an ancient Egyptian tomb over 100 years ago, and was said to have been given to him by one of his confidants, and he carried it everywhere and consulted its pages frequently. And that's in here as well. You might not be able to see it, but it's all there. His book's there with the meanings and interpretations in there. So it is a really, really interesting book, an absolute gem of a book.
Great stuff. My book this week is Messengers of Deception, UFO Contactees and Cults by Jacques Vallée. Now, Jacques Vallée is one of the most important figures in the history of ufology, aliens, and all this kind of stuff. But he was the first to break the mold. He was actually portrayed in Steven Spielberg's film as another character, but inspiration in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the French scientist. Jacques Vallée was a French astronomer who, back in the 60s, some strange data appeared on a radio telescope feed. And when he tried to get information out, they dumped it and said it wasn't important. So he suddenly took an interest in the whole UFO phenomena. By the time the 1970s came along, he no longer believed in the aliens concept of spaceships and visiting aliens. There was something very different going on. Something, it was more of a kind of a folkloric type thing, but also he was seeing and this book mainly deals with this part of the topic, how the intelligence services were creating UFO contactee cults and playing around with them and getting to understand them, because they were very impressed with the power of the UFO alien contactee visitation story had upon people. For instance, he was the first person to ever write about, going all the way back to the early 70s, about Marshall Applewhite of the Heaven's Gate cult, calling him an extremely dangerous individual. What Applewhite and these other UFO contactee cults would go around American universities like Caltech, and they would spew stories about they were in contact with aliens who were coming soon, and they would solve all the world's problems. And while Vallée would be sitting there thinking, this is such nonsense, he was amazed by how many top scientists and engineers would actually get up and go over and join them. That the more educated someone was formally, the more likely they were believed that the aliens are coming with free energy or something like that. So this book is very relevant to the nonsense right now that we're being peddled about the imminent alien contact that all the normies have now been told to believe in after decades of ridicule. The book talks about everything to do with the sort of dark side of it, of the actual UFO experience. And you come away from this with a very, very different feeling about the whole UFO alien thing than you would have previously thought about. Suddenly it seems very sinister. And for me personally, from my own pagan and other studies, esoteric studies, I was led to believe that we're probably dealing with some kind of demonic force. That's really what we're dealing with here. Now, Vallée doesn't go that way, but basically a demonic force that is pretending to be aliens from outer space, in the same way that, as go back to the beginning of the show, that demons pretend to be your Auntie Mary or something contacting you from the dead. Now, we live in a time in the world right now where it's quite obvious that the social and political and economic elite are completely insane. They're also working against the interests of human happiness and contentment and security on this planet. And they're gaslighting and destroying the concept of what it means to be a human being. At the same time, they're telling us that the aliens are coming with free energy. Well, Jacques Vallée and Messenger Deceptions warned us about this 40 years ago. This is a 2008 reprint, and it's a very, very important book, and I'm very thankful I read it back in the day when I did, because I stopped believing in the concept of flesh and blood, nuts and bolts alien spaceships coming to Earth, and started to believe we're dealing with something very much different, very spiritual, very dark, and connected very much to intelligence services.
That looks very interesting, actually, and
It is.
Perfect timing for reading right now, I think.
Oh, it couldn't be more appropriate. It's full of illustrations as well. It's also printed on very high quality paper. It's a very well topographied book. And if there's ever a book for today, Messages of Deception, UFO Contactees and Cults by Jacques Vallée. He was warning us years ago, and now we don't have a situation. We have a situation where we had Heaven's Gate and Marshall Applewhite. Now we have the US government, the British government, and they're the cult leaders right now regarding aliens.
We've come to the end of the episode, and thank you as always for watching. And don't forget to keep sending us your ideas, location reports and stories and comments. We love hearing from you and reading all the comments, and the comments section and the live chat is there for you to carry on the conversation. So please continue to leave your comments and feedback for the show. And next week, as ever, we are back over on Beyond Room 313. So please subscribe to both channels and hit the notification bell so you don't miss an episode. And please continue to like and share us all over the place so that we can reach more people. And until then, keep your eyes peeled for the unexpected. And remember, anything is possible.
Yeah, and thanks again for staying part of this conversation and the great feedback. And it's becoming a lot of fun, and I know you guys are enjoying it as well. But feel free to contribute. We also need personal stories. If you want to talk on audio or video about a personal paranormal or 14 experience you had, let us know about it. I'm going to include it in the show, or any kind of occasion report or anything unusual that you've come across. And we would love to have you hear from you, because it's a magazine show, and that's part of the format.
And I will put the link to the Hocus Focus merchandise shop in the
description box.
That's it. Yeah, in that box. And it's also, you'll see the shop as well below this video, and you can go direct from there. And I'll put the links to the books in the box as well. And I just want to ask you guys, what do you think of our new studio lights? They're pretty cool, aren't they?
I no longer you could compare what you're wearing, but I no longer. Last week I looked like Holly from Red Dwarf, not this week.
A floating head and some hands.
Okay, well, the deck is loaded. The deck is ready. There's 78 cards of magic in there, and Sarah's going to pull one of them out for us right now and tell us all about it.
This week we've got the Queen of Wands. And the Queen of Wands is a card that has a regal and confident figure seated on a very decorative throne with lion motifs facing opposite directions. And that symbolizes the connection of strength and fire. And her commanding presence oozes a sense of authority and charisma. And upon her head, there's a crown embellished with sunflowers. And these golden flowers show the Queen's ability to bring down the spirit of the natural world into her surroundings. And in her left hand, she holds a sunflower, which focuses her connection to the life force that courses through her. And this floral symbol is a reminder of her nurturing spirit and capacity to inspire growth and positivity. And a wand rests in her right hand, and its tip is touching the ground as a single sprout emerges, personifying the potential for creative endeavors and the birth of a new idea, and the ability to manifest that and breathe life into her dreams and ambitions. And at her feet, there's a black cat, signifying the Queen's deep understanding of her hidden subconscious realms, her shadow self. The cat's presence suggests that behind her outward confidence lies a deeper introspection and a connection to the mysteries of the psyche. And the Queen of Wands expresses the mixture of strength and warmth and intuitive wisdom, and her regality is balanced by this ability to empathize. Energetic, vivacious, strong, courageous, those are just some of the key words that describe this queen. So with that in mind, as you step into the week ahead, channel your own inner Queen of Wands by embracing your confidence and charismatic presence. Just as she commands attention, you too have the ability to make a strong impression and influence those around you. Let your creativity flow freely and fearlessly, because this week is a time to nurture your ideas and projects, infusing them with the spirit and passion that the Queen of Wands personifies. Trust in your creative instincts, don't be afraid of your inner power, and allow your vision to flourish. Overall, this week, the card asks you to consider stepping into your own power and express your creativity with confidence.
But that's only half the story. In the reverse, or in the negative, this is a terrible female archetype card. It represents everything from the vindictive female, the slandering gossip merchant, all the way to the borderline and even the female psychopath. It's a woman who's full of hatred and vindictiveness, a manipulator and a user, the kind of woman who'll talk about being loyal one minute and betray the person she's telling it to the next. So the Queen of Wands is a very severe card between two states. When she's on the good side, she's wonderful, she's loyal, It's the card of the wise female, generally one in middle age as well, but on the other side, she's a monster. So it's always worth bearing. There's two very severe and extreme polarities to that card.
Well, thankfully for our week, she's upright.
Good. Well, that's another show done. The third one of the second series. We're on Sarah's channel at the moment, my channel next week. And thanks very much. Thank you again, Sarah. And we'll see you all next time for some more Hocus Focusification.
See you next week.
Take care.